Question I've gotten asked a lot the last couple of weeks was, if you were counting dystopian and post-apocalyptic, where would it have ranked in your sci-fi video? And I said, why not just make that video? Hey, what's up, bookworms? We are back today to do the counterpart to my top 10 science fiction novels of all time. Guys, today going to be talking about a little bit of dystopian and post-apocalyptic. So when I did that video, that was the question I got asked the most, because I said I was not going to include that little subgenre on. I wanted to kind of keep it spaceships and lasers for that, but I want to make sure that I direct you towards that video in case you're wondering, what I want with some spaceships and lasers. But this one's going to be just about post-apocalyptic and a little bit of a dystopian on here, because I feel like that's just such a different kind of thing. When I'm talking sci-fi, I like to think about, like I said, spaceships and lasers, and I always consider this kind of like a separate genre. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, first of all, I want to say if I don't list it, I may not have read it. I want to also point you to my most popular sci-fi that I still want to read, so maybe I just haven't gotten to it yet. But these are going to be the 10 post-apocalyptic and dystopian books that I think of when I say these are the best I have ever read. So we're going to start with number 10, guys. It's going to be one that I actually read kind of recently. It's kind of weird because I just finished a trilogy and I did not really like how it ended, but I did love the first book, and I'm talking about Scythe by Neal Shusterman, book 1 in the Arc of a Scythe. This book to me was very much given that idea of the kind of things I always liked about Michael Crichton, where it's like, should we be playing God? Should we be surrendering control to a, all-knowing AI? All those kind of things that we maybe could do, but maybe we shouldn't be messing with. And it also had like a little bit of Giver in there. I felt like a nice hat tip to that legendary novel. So with this one, I really had a great time with it. It is considered a YA, but I feel like Neal Shusterman kind of writes YA in a way where it doesn't feel insulting if you're reading it as an older fellow like myself. So I felt like he actually has got a good way of writing that to where it feels like it's approachable of all ages. It's not going to really matter. It's going to feel accessible a little bit to everybody. And Scythe was just a hell of a read. I read it all in one day. And like I said, even though I didn't really like the way the series ended, I felt like I could recommend this one as just a standalone, and I think you'd be satisfied with it. It'll be kind of like The Giver, and it'll kind of have that where you may not feel like you got a real ending, but it has a lot of that stuff where you can kind of speculate on your own. I kind of feel like that's the way. So yeah, you're going to be left with some questions that you want answered, and if you want to keep going, you can. Maybe you'll feel differently about it than I did. But just this book overall, excellent, excellent book all the way through. Number 9, I read this one in high school. This is Planet of the Apes by Pierre Boulle. Is it Boulle or is it Boulle? I always said Boulle. This is from 1963. Kind of gives that nice idea of what if things were flipped around and humanity was not at the top of the food chain. You go to obviously a planet that is controlled by primates, and humans are very much treated like cattle in this world. And it's an interesting theory because there are lots of things about it where I feel like by now you've probably seen the movies and you know the big twist. Book's a little different. Those movies have kind of, over time, I'm talking about the ones from the 60s and the early 70s, not the more recent ones, but those first five original movies really did pull something from this book in each one of those movies, but it never really did like a true faithful adaptation because it has a twist ending. And I say it's not as twist ending as the movie, which was just amazing, but this was a really good ending too, and I think it'll really surprise you, even if you have seen the movies, because it is just different enough. But yeah, I love the idea of, kind of flipping things on top of their head, and everything that you think would be normal is completely backwards, and they look at you like you are the one who was very, very strange and unusual. It's a great, great read, and I think it deserves a legacy that it's got. The fact that they've made like 15 of these movies now, just goes to show that what he made just was really just an interesting idea that really grabbed hold of many, many people. Number 8, this is the Big Daddy. This will be number 1 on most people's list, I feel like. For me, I feel like it deserves a spot here, but it's always just felt like it was not quite what I felt like people sell it as. I'm talking about 1984, George Orwell. Obviously, guys, this is a legendary novel. I mean, think about so many things George Orwell's name has become like a phrase now. Orwellian themes are something that we actually refer to a lot now. But there's so many things about this: the thought police, Big Brother, the Ministry of Truth. So many things I feel like have entered our normal everyday vocabulary now because of this movie. Now, obviously, authoritarian overreach, that's really what this is about. That just government propaganda, just completely controlling our lives in every facet. And this has kind of been the book that for generations, ever since this book came out, all the way back in 1949, every generation that's read this book has been like, oh, we're entering them Orwellian times. It's happening. So I feel like every generation is going to be able to use this. Everyone's going to kind of use this book as kind of a way to fit a narrative if they want, or if they're trying to do that. They feel like they can. And that's why I feel like our parents and our parents' parents have been using this book as a way of saying this is the way that the world is headed now. It's kind of funny because George Orwell did say he kind of wrote this book kind of as a satire, and the fact that it's been just kind of listed like this for so many years. But it's like one of those things that you can always go to this book and you can find something to say, yep, see, that's the way that the world's headed right now. It's just because it was so vastly ahead of its time. And I'm stunned this book was allowed to succeed, because you think about the time period this came out, the people were probably like, get back, demon. It has really stood the test of time. But over time, guys, so many things have just straight up copied this or parodied it, or just, word for word, beat for beat, just kind of just taken the ideas that he has here. And it's stuff that just scared the hell out of us, right? And it's one of those things that you always become about, well, is this actually 1984 right now? Number 7, I already kind of mentioned it earlier, The Giver by Lois Lowry. This is one of those that I did read last year, and everybody was like, oh my God, you didn't read that when you were in junior high? Well, I was a freshman in high school the year this book came out, so I just missed it. But I do think this book was really, really special. I think it kind of plays those themes of having limits to our memory is a good thing, and I love that idea. But the kind of the embracing individuality over conformity, that's the kind of things that we want to kind of get back to. That's what I love so much about Childhood's End, is it just really kind of play with that, where we lose our individuality if we're all, just have like a perfect utopian life and everything's the same for everyone. What will we have to overcome? What will humanity innovate on? And I love those themes. That's stuff that always is fun to play with. But with this, I can see so many things that were kind of inspired by this. I kept going back. I talked about Cradle. I felt like Cradle kind of copied at the very, very beginning of this, it went with the ideas first presented when you're doing like how you test into what class and things like that you're into. And Fallout 3, I feel like the beginning of Fallout 3 is straight from The Giver. Definitely a great book. I didn't read the sequels. I feel like they've gotten kind of a mixed reception with everyone I've talked to. But this book, yeah, it deserves the legacy it has. And that's why, even though I didn't even read it a year ago, and usually with these things, I say legacy takes time unless it's just really, really impactful. And yeah, this being number 7, above something like 1984, shows how much of an impact it had on me. As did number 6, The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. I think I read this in junior high, and it just completely blew me away. H.G. Wells, vastly ahead of his time. This guy was writing about stuff that he had no idea what he was doing, and he completely nailed it. I mean, just some of the things that he's talking about just had to seem so just like out there. That's a pipe dream that'll never happen. And it's just amazing. He wrote this all the way back in 1895, I think. Yeah, so incredible book. And yeah, I love the idea. It plays with class structure in a way that's like, hey, we need to stop being so divided as a race, or we're going to destroy ourselves, and it's like when our protagonist kind of interacts with Eloy, and they basically have no interest in like higher education or anything like that. They have no interest in reading or book. Like, they have books and they're just like turning to dust because they don't even care about it. Because, hey, utopian society, we don't have to worry about any of that stuff. We got everything kind of taken care of. We don't need to worry about anything. And then you got the big old creepy Morlocks, which are still to this day things that kind of give me nightmares. Like, we had this little underpass by our swimming pool at our old house where you could kind of go underneath the freeway, and I was like, nah, there's some Morlocks or something down there. I ain't going down there. So this book affected me in a lot of ways, but yeah, it really does have a message that it is giving, and it doesn't do it like, like we do now, where everything's just so ham-fisted and really in your face. I feel like this is really done in a way that you can get those messages across and do it in the proper kind of way. But yeah, it's one of those that I feel like has really stood the test of time, obviously, as old as it is, and as much as it's been copied. Amazing book. And I always love the idea of you can't change time. That's just one of those things that's just you're insignificant in that aspect, but it's fun to play with. Number 5, I talked about it last year when he sadly passed away. The Road by Cormac McCarthy, I've said, is definitely one of the greatest dystopian novels of all time. I think that this book just absolutely nails that father and son relationship. I read this book before I had kids. I don't think I could do it now. I think now I'd be just a big old sack of tears reading this book, because the relationship between the man and the boy, he doesn't give them many names, is just so touching and so heartfelt. And it's one of those that just says, look, the world has completely fell apart around us. We are just living in the worst time. It's end times. This is just the worst time to be alive right now. And it's got this theme of survival and never losing hope. Always trying to stay optimistic, because if you don't, man, you can spiral out of control real quick. And it's just one of those stories that just makes you want to keep going. You want to keep rooting for these characters to just make it over that next hill, you know, and just see maybe over that next hill there is that shining beacon of hope, something that we can get to and kind of start to rebuild humanity here. And Cormac McCarthy's such a badass. He doesn't even tell you what caused this, and you're all in. You don't even care. You just want to know what happens next. Such a great read, but it's an amazing character study as well. And like I said, if you've got young kids, this will be a tough read for you. But I think it's in a way that's going to kind of hit you where it counts. And yeah, really good. Number 4, this was one of the best books I read a couple years ago. It was my number 1 book of that year. I'm talking about Swan Song by Robert McCammon. This one just completely blew me away. It's written in 1987, which was like almost a decade after The Stand. And it gets all those comparisons to The Stand by Stephen King. And it is very similar. But I feel like while one is dealing with a, you know, almost just completely ravaged humanity with a virus, this is obviously the big one. What we worried about the most in the 80s, man, it was about the bomb. And this was what happens when the bombs get dropped. You know, when mutually assured destruction happened and the whole world got wasted, what happened after that? And I've always read books like this. It was always, yeah, the nuclear apocalypse happened 100 years ago, and now we're just now picking up the pieces and trying to get... This is like, you see it happen, and it's just so damn real. It's scary as hell. It really is when he's describing, you know, seeing like out in the field, and all of a sudden these missiles start coming out of the ground before the launch happens and stuff, either by the silos. Scary shit. But it's just, it has a ton of similarities to The Stand. It really does. But I feel like they're both great books, and they're still very different. Yeah, it deals with the survivors of this world-ending event, and how do they go about picking up the pieces of lives and trying to put a new life together in this new world. But outside of that, they're very different books, and I don't see why everyone always has to say, oh, this book's better than The Stand, or The Stand's so much better than Swan Song. What's better than one good thing? 2 good things, and these are 2 great things. And I think that Swan Song is one of the best character journeys I've ever read. I was bawling like a baby the last 50 pages of this book. It's just so good because his characters are amazing, and I feel like this one book alone made me a Robert McCammon fan for life. I'm going through and going to probably read everything that the man has written now. I read about 5 or 6 books of his now, and it's only looking like he's gonna be one of my favorite authors ever. But you'll be hard pressed to find someone who writes characters as good as Robert McCammon does, and their relationships with one another. So good. In this one, you will go to hell and back with these characters. It's just an amazing trip. Number 3, this one I kind of put on my horror list as well, because I feel like it does have a little bit of horror, a little bit of sci-fi, and a whole lot of post-apocalyptic. About I Am Legend by Richard Matheson. I feel like this book is just the pinnacle of describing loneliness, solitary, depression. When you're the last man on earth, you know, obviously there's going to be lots of things that you got to try to deal with, and just that feeling of otherness, I guess. It's what Robert Neville goes through in this book is, do you really want to live in a world like this when you're the last human alive, at least you think you are, and every single night you're being hunted? You know, is that really a world you want to live in? So it's one of those books where you kind of have dealing with the struggle of, you know, hey, should I just end this, or just, you know, should I just end it and get it over with? Or do I try to just keep on surviving and hoping that I can find a way to better my situation? But to me, no book out there really gives you that feeling of just solitude like this book does. It'll make you feel so alone to where you're really struggling. You're down there in the dirt with him, and you're struggling, and you're wondering, I don't know what I would do in this situation, and I hope I never ever find out. So, you know, sometimes when you get a little older and you're like, okay, less people, please. But when you realize you're the only person, we just, as humans, man, we have a need for companionship, and you're the last one left. Obviously, that's something that no one ever needs to experience. Number 2, just talked about it, guys. I bet most of you thought this was going to be number 1. I got The Stand by Stephen King. Obviously, 1978. I think this book is everything that is great about sacrifice, about resilience, about redemption, because you are going through the ringer with all of these characters. You have seen the fall of humanity, and this virus wipes out 99.6% of the population due to something called the superflu or Captain Trips. It's such an amazing character story because he has probably 40 or 50 characters in the story, and you will either love or love to hate every single one of them. It's incredible what he's able to do. I don't feel like there's one single throwaway character in this story. Now, it's a story that's not going to work for everybody. It is classified as fantasy. I mean, to me, it's obviously post-apocalyptic. I get why they put that. But it's because it does seem almost like, hey, this is like a Lord of the Rings, or like Walking to Mordor kind of story in the apocalypse. Obviously, in present time, well, it was present time for 1978. You know, these characters are walking from like Maine to Boulder, Colorado, and things like that. So I get the comparison, but for me, this one's all about, you know, making the stand. Obviously, I don't want to really give too much away if you haven't read it, because I think it's an amazing story that everyone should read. It's my second favorite Stephen King book, but people that tell me they think it's the best book he's ever written, I don't argue, because it's a damn good book. And yes, guys, it stands on the ledge with Swan Song as two of the best post-apocalyptic books of all time. And I do prefer The Stand, but really it's like flip a coin almost. I mean, those are two amazing, amazing books. But The Stand, again, what puts it over the top for me are the characters. I just love them so much. And of course, Randall Flagg, the Man in Black. That is just an all-time villain. And I feel like the villain in Swan Song very much was like almost too much of a carbon copy of Randall Flagg, and I feel like that's what puts The Stand just a little bit over it. But again, I love both of those books, and I'm gonna love both of those books. And yeah, it's very, very close, like I said. But anything in this top 5 here probably could have been number 2 through 5 for me, because guys, number 1, and I don't know how many people were going to guess this one, because I said it was one that I haven't actually reviewed on the channel, because I feel like it gets a lot of heightened reactions when I say that my favorite dystopian post-apocalyptic book of all time is Fahrenheit 451 by the late great Ray Bradbury. I think this is the book that really just opened my eyes to a lot of things that people give credit to 1984. I'm like, I feel like Ray Bradbury was way ahead of the curve on everything else, because I can look around and say, wow, there's a lot of stuff that's feeling very, very scary right now. Censorship, loss of humanity and individualism. He actually predicted in this book that there would be loss of relationships because everyone's just staring at a screen all day. This guy was a prophet. I feel like this book is everything that 1984 gets credit for. This book was way ahead of the curve. I feel like it has way more things that hit closer to home, at least for me. But I just love the idea of, don't be reading books, because you might actually get thoughts for yourself. And obviously training people through propaganda to believe that something like censoring art is something that you want. That's a scary idea. It is a very, very scary idea. Everybody thinks about like the burning the books. Obviously, yeah, that's terrible stuff. But the idea that we can't let people have books because they might start forming thoughts of their own, terrifying stuff. Terrifying stuff. And I mean, again, with me in this book, it just feels like so many things that he was saying about that book. And it might be just like 1984. Every generation can say, oh, yeah, that's happening right now. I mean, my parents thought that us watching the TV was going to be like that. Me, as a parent, I look at my kids always staring at their iPad, and I think, oh, my God, here it is. Can't even go to like a party. You remember you used to go to parties and people would talk to each other? Now everybody just hangs out and looks at their phone together. And that's really scary, you know, for someone like me who loves to create friendships and relationships and talk to people and get to know people. That's terrifying. That really, really is. So it's one of those things that, you know, our parents, like I said, they thought that the idiot box, the TV, was going to ruin the world. And now my generation is thinking with our kids that, you know, smartphones and iPads are going to ruin the world, and you know, who knows, their kids are going to think next. You know, who knows? Maybe like memory implant chips or something are going to ruin the world. Who knows? Who knows? But it's one of those books that will really, really make you think. And on top of that, Ray Bradbury was just a master of the English language. I just think this guy could just write a string of words that would just make you sit back and say, "Wow, that was just beautiful." But yeah, one of the greatest writers ever, in my opinion, is Ray Bradbury. And it's not just how beautiful his prose is, but just the things that he talks about. He can talk about truly terrifying stuff, and you'd be reading and saying, wow, that's beautiful. It's beautiful the way that he put it. But Fahrenheit 451 is a book that I feel like has been banned and unbanned like a dozen times. If you haven't read it, you owe it to yourself to check it out. I don't feel like I'm going to sit here and tell you, hey, everything he wrote in here is true. Because like I said, just like with 1984, people are always going to kind of move those field goal posts to kind of arrange whatever narrative they're trying to get through. Not me. To me, it's still speculative fiction. But a lot of the things that he talks about in there, I'm like, I mean, I can see where he was coming from. And I feel like he was a very, very smart man that he saw this all the way back in 1953. That's really, really crazy stuff. But guys, that is my 10. As always, I would be much more interested in hearing what your 10 favorite dystopian or post-apocalyptic books are obviously, outside of hearing why mine are terrible. But, you know, hey, what do you think about any of these? I would love to hear below. And I would love to hear your list below or your favorite books in this little subgenre here. So I have got a couple on the list this year, guys, that I am going to be reading myself. I'm going to be reading A Canticle for Leibowitz, which is supposed to be a really, really great post-apocalyptic one. And I'll be reading The Forever War, which I think is obviously a little bit more sci-fi than dystopian. But I'm saying that I am going to continue to expand upon this list, so maybe it's one that I can update in a few years' time. But as of today, these would be the 10 that I pick, and I would recommend all 10 of them if you haven't read them yet, and I'd love to know what you think. So drop in the comments, guys, and let me know, and I will talk to you there.